This is always fun. Okay, looking good. That is live, and this is live as well. All right, welcome to class, everyone. Thanks so much for making it here again. We have another wonderful guest lecturer with us today. Okay, folks, listen. Everyone's watching, including the internet. Now is not a good time to continue those conversations, okay? Hi, up here. Now we're starting. Okay? All right. Thanks, everyone. So I just want to welcome to our class Sera Tajima. She's an accomplished founder, startup advisor, and also a climate investor. She has a visionary approach to business and sustainable growth. She's worked in tech for 7 years and has a proven track record of helping startups hit their success metrics. She's worked for companies like Zendesk and Webflow. Everyone here knows Webflow probably. She now uses her expertise to guide early stage startups through strategic growth. She's also a bootstrap founder of a product design education company. So she has a lot of knowledge on product design, some of which she will share with us today. And she bridges the gap between theory and the real world. And in her free time, she's committed to shaping a sustainable future through angel investing, paving a way for the conscious startup ecosystem. So you want to create the world that you wish to see, and you can do it by joining Sera in this talk. Now, as always, I'm going to be collecting questions from you as we're watching the talk, and feel free to post that in Teams. I've also shared with you the Figma file in Teams, so go to that channel. Make sure to click on that, and you'll be able to follow along there as well, okay? And as usual, if you want to post any questions online, you can do that as well. Otherwise, just raise your hand after class, and we'll be discussing some of the questions. Now, that being said, also welcome to all of the people on the live stream. Thank you very much for tuning in. And over to Sera. Thank you very much for joining us, Sera.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having me today. Really excited to be here with you all. So today we are talking about conscious growth design. And before we get into it, I just want to take a moment to introduce myself. So I'm Sera Tajima. I am a founder, principal designer, and a climate investor. I'm originally from Maui, Hawaii. However, I've lived all over the place. So California, Japan, France, Texas, and the Netherlands. So quite a few places. And I'm currently living between Maui and Amsterdam. So this guy, you might see him behind me at times during the presentation, is my mini dachshund. He is very spoiled. And I draw experience from a bunch of different companies. So as Leonard said, I've worked in tech for over 7 years now. So I've worked mostly in-house with tech companies. However, I've also more recently done some contracting. So with companies like BetterUp, Zendesk, maybe you've heard of, Y Combinator is really popular for startups, as well as Webflow and Hired. So what am I up to now? Well, I have 2 businesses because one apparently was not enough. So I essentially teach designers and I help startups grow. And recently I've also taken on a new direction, which is focusing on investing more of my time and money into climate tech. So this means helping startups specifically in climate tech, but also doing more angel investing in climate tech. I'm also working on the launch of a podcast and newsletter. So we're already in the process of recording. We had Redona on, who has over 100,000 followers, I believe, on Instagram, as well as Fawns from Netflix, Tommy, who has a massive TikTok following, and Tice, who's a creator on LinkedIn. So if you're interested in finding out about that, by the way, definitely go to The Craft and subscribe to the newsletter. So now that I've introduced myself, I would love to get to know a little bit more about you. If you could go into the FigJam link that Leonard shared and tell me the dream scenario for your career. So just grab one of the yellow stickies and start dropping in, where you see yourself in 3 to 5 years. What is your ideal scenario? Have we used FigJam before, by the way? Do I need to do a briefer?
I think everyone is familiar with Figma, but does anyone need a little bit of an intro to how FigJam works? It's pretty much like Miro, a little bit of a
So essentially, yeah, grabbing these stickies.
Okay, let me open it as well, just to make sure that we're all
Awesome.
in there.
Yeah, and then as we do that, I'm going to continue. So
Sounds good.
today I want to talk with you about how I became a designer. We'll talk very briefly about product design because I think you're already quite familiar with UX. We'll talk about growth design, case studies, risks, conscious design, and how to succeed. So let's go into how I got into design. I graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, not too long ago, although I'm definitely getting older. And I originally intended to go into law. So I worked in law for the first 2 years after graduating and was really unhappy with it. And from there, I decided to take a coding boot camp while I was in Sweden. And that got me into tech. So that was my first encounter really with product design. And from there, I was at a point where I was working in a different position in tech. So I was an instructional designer and I created content for developers. I had a six-figure salary, a fancy title, and I was at a really well-known company. So I had all of these things that I was told would make me successful and therefore happy. However, what I found was that I was really not happy despite having all of these things that supposedly, make you successful. And so from there, I really decided to follow my instincts and go with design. Design is something that I had wanted to do since I was a kid. And so I took a boot camp, and that really confirmed for me that design was for me, and it was something that I really wanted to pursue. So that's where it all started. I thought it would be fun to share with you all what really surprised me about being a product designer. And so the first thing was really going into design education, just how much research and strategy was involved. Because I think for people who are not involved in design, it's really easy to assume that design is just the end result and it's that visual output. The second thing that really surprised me was the amount of public speaking. So as a designer, you're going to find yourself presenting a lot. And so this was a skill that I really developed more as a product designer and became a lot more comfortable with storytelling, with presenting my work, and so forth. And the third thing is just the power of communication. There's some great people posting on LinkedIn about storytelling and bringing in stakeholders. And essentially, the process of communicating your work is almost equally important to just doing the project itself, because if you're unable to get that stakeholder buy-in, then you're going to find, especially at particular companies, that it's much harder to push that design forward. Okay, so let's go into product design.
Sorry,
How are we doing
Sarah?
with Big John, by the way? Yeah.
Just a quick update from us. We don't actually have editing rights on the Figma file, so this is why nobody's actually able to edit.
Oh, no.
There, by the way.
Okay. Let me see. I thought I had shared anyone with the link can edit. All right, let's try that again. Are you able to edit? Yeah, okay. Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so let's go into product design. Okay, product design is notoriously difficult to explain. So the funny thing is, if you ask 5 different product designers to explain product design to you, you would probably get 5 different results. So I'm sure you've seen things like this, which are the double diamond method, or perhaps you've seen design thinking. And while this is a nice way to explain the design thinking process, it is really in reality like a fourth of what product designers actually do. Okay, so this is...
I don't think we're hearing the sound, Sarah, just in case you're wondering about the video.
Oh, no. Okay, so this is just a funny slide where she's trying to explain girl math. It's a trend on TikTok. And so explaining design to a non-designer is very challenging. That's the point. So let's go into a definition of product design. So a designer solves problems for businesses and users by identifying the right problem, which is key, collaborating with teammates, aligning stakeholders, of course, as we've spoken about communication earlier, and creating a functional solution. So that solution needs to actually solve that pain point that it was created for. And so now that we have an understanding of product design, let's go into growth design. And I can't see you, but I'm just curious, who here has heard of growth design before? And maybe Leonard can tell me.
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually, let me just turn around the camera so that you can see them as well. But who here has actually heard about growth design as a thing? Who has got any ideas about that so far? Nobody, looks like it. Nobody's
No?
actually
Okay,
heard about growth
perfect.
design?
That's why I'm
Okay.
here. Okay, nice. So what is growth design? Growth designers speak the language of the business. So they identify what will have the highest impact in helping the business succeed. And okay, so now we're going to do math. So let's take out a paper and pencil. I'm just kidding. We're not doing math. But it is good for designers to have a general. Did they leave? So
Did
it's
you hear
good
the
for
awe?
designers to have.
Audience? Okay.
Oh, no, I didn't. So yes, this is a joke. Growth designers do know basic math, which I'm sure you all do, but we're not going to do any calculations today. So growth design is at the intersection of product design and growth hacking. And maybe growth hacking is something that you've heard of a little bit, or at least cross paths with, but we'll dive into it a little bit deeper. So growth design is a discipline that really focuses on using design principles and methodologies. And this is to improve the business metrics and the user experience. And so we're going to go through some examples in this presentation so that that can sort of sink in. But essentially, it's a delicate balance of meeting business goals to scale and solving customer problems. And funnily enough, this is actually a common question that product designers get asked in their interview is, how do you balance the user needs with the business goals? Okay, so how do they do this? Well, maybe in middle school or high school, you've learned the scientific method. And essentially, this is what growth designers use as a process to drive targeted outcomes, as opposed to what some companies can do is just throw a bunch of money into marketing, right? So the more we market, maybe the more customers we'll get. And that's one approach that a company could take, or you could even blend the two. But growth is really scrappy and it's measurable. So let's talk about the difference between product design and growth. So product designers sit across the entire product experience. And so, for example, a product designer might be on a specific feature, whereas a growth designer is really going to be focused on the highest point of impact. So if it's an early stage startup, for example, maybe they know that they need to acquire customers, and that's the goal for them. So maybe they actually have a growth team that is oriented specifically around acquiring new customers. Then we have product designers who identify goals, whereas growth design identifies opportunities that they can leverage, right, for the business. Product designers solve pain points. So, how can we help the user accomplish this goal, or what challenge are they having using our product? Growth designers are testing their hypotheses. A product designer will typically ship to completion. So if you're creating a new MVP, for example, for a company, you're not going to ship that when it's halfway done, at 50%. However, growth designers will ship to learn, so you're going to find that they are going to ship a lot earlier. Okay, and they are the same in the sense that growth designers need to be very strong in product thinking, research, interaction, visual design, and empathy. However, growth designers will move quickly and ship experiments regularly. Their metrics are more clear and more focused on a specific objective. And success might not mean a perfectly polished design, which might be a little bit hard to comprehend. I think certainly for me, when I graduated straight from design education and went into my first job, I saw this whole landing page that we were working on, and I thought, well, why don't we improve the whole thing? Because the whole thing can be improved. But actually, when it comes to growth design, if you are trying to make a very specific outcome, you want to be able to tie the impact to the changes that you've made. So if you're changing an entire page, you're going to have no idea what caused the new impact. So question, are growth designers less user-focused? What do we think? A yes or no?
Sorry. I don't think that's a yes, unless you want to repeat the question for everyone.
Okay. Now, are growth designers less user-focused?
So if you're thinking about UX and what you know about UX, do you think growth designers are less user-focused or not? No? There's head shaking. I disagree. Okay.
Okay. Okay, awesome. Yeah, glad to hear that. So this is false. Growth designers really, by necessity, try to get into the mind of the user. So they're trying to uncover the underlying motivations. Why is the user using this product? What are they trying to solve? Advocating for the user and even seeking to change behavior. So no, they are not less user-focused. And the question might be, well, who cares about growth design? Well, growth design is going to be a really beneficial tool in every designer's skill set. So if you're, for example, a design system designer and you're specialized in design operations, you might not think that understanding growth design at a high level could be helpful. However, growth design is essentially helping you to think from a business perspective. And so if you're trying to create a new design system and you need to get business buy-in for that design system, it does really help you at a high level to understand growth so that you can understand how to communicate the value of that design system to the leadership team. So now I want to go through some basic principles. So we spoke about the scientific method, hypothesis, testing, and iterating. So it's pretty basic, just keeps going. And here are some growth principles for you. So moving quickly, we've emphasized that a lot so far. Surviving disruption is a big one, right? Because there's a lot of things that can disrupt a business. Then testing to learn, using data is a huge one for growth designers, and staying ahead of market changes. So earlier we looked at the double diamond method, and now we are looking at my creation of the growth design process. And you're going to notice that things seem to happen a lot earlier. So you're shipping a lot earlier than in a normal design process. Starting right away with strategy and then making that hypothesis based on what the business priority is, going into ideating, execution, having that targeted solution, shipping really early, and then kind of analyzing those results and shipping again. So these are the core growth pillars that all growth experts are familiar with. And it's a really great framing to generally understand a business. So acquisition is acquiring customers. Activation is when your customer has that aha moment. So this is really when the customer understands the value that they gain from using your product. Retention is keeping that customer. So making sure that they're not dissatisfied with the product, but also maybe going to a competitor who has a better product. And then there's monetization, which is how the business monetizes. So this is the R framework, which is why it's called the Pirate framework. And it's essentially representative of the customer lifetime value. So what we have here is acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, also tied to monetization. And then finally, we have referrals. And it wouldn't be a growth presentation without talking about the North Star. So a North Star is a guiding light for a company's long-term strategy, aligning the entire organization towards a common goal. And a North Star represents two things: the company vision and a metric that captures the product strategy. So a North Star should capture all of these things: the customer's success moments, measurable progress, and a path to revenue. And this might be hard to understand at a high level, so we're going to go through some examples. So thinking about this through the lens of what delivers value to the customer, we're looking at Spotify, time spent listening, LinkedIn, monthly active users, Uber, rides per week. I'm sure everyone has taken an Uber, right? Slack, daily active users. And then we have WhatsApp, number of messages sent, Airbnb, number of nights booked, and Amazon, number of purchases per month. So the next little section that I have for you in FigJam is growth pillars. And I want you to grab one of these dots here and vote for me under what growth pillar does number of messages sent in WhatsApp fall under? What do we think? Is it acquisition, activation, retention, monetization? Number of messages sent. Okay, I see a bunch of people heading for retention. Or are we unsure? Yeah. Okay. So I think we've got the gist really well. So it's retention. Number of messages sent in WhatsApp represents how many people are continuously using WhatsApp. Okay, so let's move on. What do you think the North Star is for a company like Instagram or TikTok? That's the next section. So grab a sticky and write out some ideas on what you think that North Star is. How would a company like Instagram or TikTok know that they were successful? And maybe I'll leave this up in case that helps. Okay, I already see some really great ideas. Yeah, awesome. Really good. Okay. So if you had anything to the tune of this, then you are on the right path. Signups, usage frequency, length of time spent, and number of videos published. Okay, so I want to go into some more examples. And first I'm going to talk about Airbnb and acquisition. Let me make sure I go back to this. Yeah. Okay, so for Airbnb, when the founders first got started, they were very broke and they had essentially realized that there was a conference in town, but all the hotels were booked out and they decided to rent out their place. And that's the origin story of Airbnb. So they got started by doing something that was really a growth hack, which is they decided to post on Craigslist in order to try to get customers through to Airbnb, because of course it's difficult to acquire customers when no one knows who you are or what you do. And another thing that they noticed was that once they got customers, the customers weren't booking. And so what they realized was that this might be tied to the quality of the photos and people not really knowing what they were getting themselves into. So the hypothesis that they made here was that high quality photos was the issue. And they hired a professional photographer to go around and take photos. And from that experiment, they made 2 to 3 times more bookings. So now photos are a core part of using Airbnb, where they even have like the different rooms listed and photos of each room. Dropbox did something similar for referrals. And so basically with Dropbox, they were trying to incentivize referrals, but weren't seeing great results. And so what they did is they created a referral program to acquire new customers, and they offered 250 megabytes of space. So both people, the person who referred and the person that was joining Dropbox for the first time, would both get 250 megabytes of space. And from this, they actually saw a 60% increase in referral signups. Okay, so that gives sort of an idea, hopefully, of some well-known companies and how you can think about growth hacks that they used. So now I want to go into some of my own case studies. And so projects that I've worked on are around A/B testing, acquisition hooks, self-service, mobile onboarding, customer churn research, retention, and a retention setup guide. And so this project I find really fun to share about because it was such a massive lift. And so what we're looking at here is the analytics for a new mobile experience that we launched, mobile onboarding. And with this, even though the mobile onboarding launch was very successful and we saw an improvement, we noticed that there was high drop-off on this one area where people had to enter their work history description. It was a jobs marketplace. So it's typical on the splash screen to see high drop-off because you might not be attracting the right user to the platform. So perhaps they were in a different position and this was a tech jobs marketplace. And then another place where it's common to see high drop-off is on a sign-up screen, because anywhere that you start asking people for personal information, it's common to see high drop-off. However, here we noticed high drop-off, and so we went into Hotjar and essentially checked out what was happening with the users on this page. And I came up with 2 different sort of hypotheses, which were one, that writing is tedious on mobile. And the second is that users don't know how to draft a work description that will get them an introduction to a potential employer. So you probably don't have your resume on you, right, when you're on your mobile phone. So we went from this description to completely changing what this looked like. So instead we framed it as tell us about your accomplishments. And then we gave a lot of guidance on how to format this. And if they also clicked on this eye icon, they would get more examples of metrics and how to tie this into your accomplishments. And from this, here are some real user entries that we saw when we released this at 10%. So the user entries were just incredible compared to what we were getting before. And we actually saw a 214% increase in candidates that got interview requests. So not only did we help get them to that marketplace, but they also got way more requests to interview.
So quick question about that.
Yeah.
Was that then product design or was it UX design in that case? Or is that a mood question here?
Oh, interesting. So this was a growth design position officially, but I would say we covered a bunch of points, right? Mobile onboarding technically could be considered outside the experience of the product since it's the onboarding. And so what you can often find is that growth teams will tackle that sort of experience on getting users into the product. I think in general in San Francisco, though, people will oftentimes use the term product design.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Let me know, by the way, how I'm doing on time.
You're doing okay so far.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So let's see. The second project I want to share with you is from a company that I worked with in Amsterdam. And this was that customers were really struggling to get set up and support teams were spending a lot of time actually manually onboarding them on the phone. So what we identified with the team was that the aha moment or the activation moment, if you remember earlier, is 10 tickets or more. So by creating 10 tickets or more in this support tool, that's when the customer thought, oh, okay, this product is really valuable and it's working for me. So the problem was, how do we make it clear to users how to get set up for that success to increase this activation metric? And there were 0.5% of customers creating 10 tickets or more. So this was very sad and a massive opportunity. And I'm showing this screen because I also think it's important to let you know that it's good to push back sometimes on requests that you get. So initially, this was what they wanted us to put in the onboarding guide, and we thought that was way too much text and it wouldn't be a nice user experience. So I bring this up because you're going to face various points throughout your career and throughout projects where it's really worth fighting for that user experience, and ultimately it benefits not only the user but the company, right? Because at the end of the day, if we used this, I doubt people would read it. So here's some ideation that I did with this setup guide, and the result was that 7% of customers created 10 tickets or more. So this was a really great success. I wish you could hear the sound. Does everyone know that? The yeet thing from SNL? Okay, so let me see here. Okay, awesome. So let's go to takeaways. Takeaways from being a growth product designer. Laser focus on the goal. So knowing exactly what you're trying to impact so that you can impact that specifically. Constraints are beneficial. Constraints can often increase creativity as well. Designing with data, evangelizing the process. So as you go through the projects that you do as a designer, it's good not to just focus on the project, but also to really get your teammates excited about it, bring them into the process, share the research that was done, ask people what they think. And finally, one that I really want to emphasize, because it's critical as a growth designer to embrace failure to win. And so failure is actually redirection on how to be successful. So let's go into potential risks. Okay. Okay, in FigJam again, let me open this up. What do we think are some potential problems with designing for growth as a business? What problems might arise from that?
Just maybe as an info for the live streamers that we're in the thick jam file right now, which is why this is a little bit quiet for what we're doing.
But feel free, yeah, if you're watching the live stream also to write it on a sticky or a note in front of you. I think it's just a good exercise. Okay, so I will read some of these out loud then. Cutting corners to optimize might deteriorate quality, forget about core goals, losing focus around the original goal and company mission, changing an aspect that does help with growth, hyper-focusing on efficiency. Okay, interesting. Yeah, let's continue. So the risks of growth, there can be quite a lot of risks. Rapid growth is very risky for a business because it can negatively impact the business's bottom line. So instead of growing rapidly, you want to grow sustainably. There's also manipulative design. And so this is something that we can particularly focus on as product designers or growth designers or whatever specialization you have, is really focusing on humanity-centered design. And so we're going to talk about this term because maybe you've noticed as I'm talking that it's humanity-centered instead of human-centered. And so it's a newer term. Then there's also waste and pollution. Even as digital designers, because we're using energy, there can still be waste and pollution. We're still consuming energy. And then there's also circular design as the solution to this, which is something newer that's come up as a response to climate change. Okay. So manipulative design is something that I wanted to focus on as the risks of growth because we are product designers. And so this is particularly going to be in your area of expertise. And so some examples of manipulative design are comparison prevention, fake scarcity. Thinking of something that comes to mind, like if you're booking a flight, for example, and you see, oh, there's only one ticket left. You know, they're really trying to pressure you into buying, and that might not be a real representation of the availability. Forced action, hard to cancel, hidden costs. I actually encountered this at one point in my career where we did user research, and the guy didn't realize that by continuing in this trial that he was going to be charged. So they asked for the credit card information, but didn't actually tell him, hey, we're going to charge you immediately. And so that hurt the trust in the company. And so that was an example of manipulative design, whether it was intended or unintended. And then also pre-selecting an option for a customer. So going back to this term, humanity-centered design. This is Don Norman. If you haven't heard of him, he's like the father of UX, created Nielsen-Norman Group with Jacob Nielsen, and he said, humanity-centered design builds on the principles of human-centered design, except it expands them. We must think about all living things and about the environment. We must realize we are part of a complex system, so what we do here can impact people all across the world and have a long-term effect. So I posted on growth a while back on LinkedIn, and I got this question from Zach, which I really loved. I'm fairly unfamiliar with growth design, but I'm curious how growth designers balance the needs of the business with the potential human and global impact that might ensue with growth. And this is such a great question because most designers are only thinking about the impact on the user. So when it comes to growth and who determines what growth is, it can really go two ways. So, you know, impact from designing, if we think about Apple, for example, where Steve Jobs essentially designed all these products that didn't exist before, and that influenced society. It could also be the other way around, where, you know, some sort of trend in society is ultimately influencing what the designer does or what the company makes. So the TLDR for what is the impact of growth, it depends how you define growth. And so growth is not only, you know, making money for a business, although yes, businesses need to make money in order to survive. We can take a more critical look at how we're defining growth at every company that we're at. So the question is really, what is the business optimizing for, and what is the impact you want to have? And if we go back to, for example, the manipulative design sort of tactics that we spoke through, using any one of these, through the example I gave, is that it can negatively impact the customer and make them not even want to continue with your business. And so, growth for the sake of growth is not necessarily healthy. It needs to be really about creating that the lifetime value with the customer, and really nurturing that relationship and valuing it. So who defines impact? Well, it's the company, of course, that you're at, but it's also you as a designer. So it will be your job as a designer to really define what the impact is that you're trying to have with whatever product you're working on. Because ultimately, it's up to us to define what growth means. Okay, so let's go into conscious design, and I'm just going to give you some tips, and then we'll wrap up. So, conscious design involves intentional choices to create products that benefit the user, society, and the environment. And the rise of conscious design is really coming from a pressing need to ensure that future products are ethical, sustainable, and regenerative. So this is quite a new term, conscious design. So now I want to ask in FigJam, how might we consciously design a product?
And this should come very close to your hearts, because I know that in the GVDA program, there's a lot of interest in that, right? Like a lot of other classes that you might take are about sustainable and conscious design. So feel free to add your stuff to the FigJam board here. I'm sure you're full of
I would love to see. Okay, and as we're doing that, or actually, I don't want to give any hints, so let's wait. Okay, I'm going to read some of them out loud. Environmentally friendly packaging for products. By the way, is everyone here studying UX design specifically, or is it more broad? Is it also physical products?
So the program is global business and digital art. So UX design is just a small part of the overall program. So design in general, I think there's a lot of interest here. But also business. So your business aspects are speaking very much to the interests here.
Disability friendly, I really like that one. So really considering accessibility as a designer, because some businesses maybe don't see the point to, oh, why should I consider an edge case, or why should I consider designing for, it's a third of the population, so it's quite a lot of people. But ultimately, when you make the experience better for people who have some sort of accessibility challenge, it actually makes the experience better for all of the users. So one example that we can actually think of this during the lockdown was that everyone started needing subtitles. And that was something that, initially wasn't created as a feature for everyone. It was created for people who had some sort of impairment.
And that's, I think, the principles of universal design, right? Like, I think Ben Schneiderman has talked about that as well, as like universal design that's literally for everyone with all of the different abilities. And I think that's more.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure all of us know at least one person who has some sort of disability, whether that's ADHD or, having some sort of neurodiversity or vision impairments. So, okay, let me go into some examples. So, how to create sustainable growth. Always ask why, first of all. So don't feel like once you're working at a company, you can't challenge the company, whoever it is that you're working with or talking to. And second, give the user control over their experience. So this is going to be very important. Designing for your users' emotions. There are definitely companies that will neglect this and not consider the emotional journey that the user goes through when they're using this product. This could be very important for specific products as well. So for example, if we think of like a life insurance company for someone who's just had a family member pass away. So thinking of these moments for delight can be really beneficial. Considering edge cases, this could tie into the accessibility. Preventing user bias and designer bias. It's very easy to bring bias into the creation process. And I'm sure we've all heard someone create a product through the lens of, oh, well, I would do this if I was the user, or this is how I would do it. So we'll design for that case. Protect freedom of thought. This could be particularly relevant for social media. encouraging long-term relationships and value, something I spoke about. So not manipulating the user into short-term transaction, like trying to create revenue from one transaction, because ultimately you hurt that long-term relationship. Helping users accomplish their goal without sidetracking them. So getting them to the purpose that they're using your product for quickly and easily. Helping users forecast the consequence of an action. That could tie back into the payment example where this guy didn't understand that he gave his credit card during a trial, but he would be charged for it. Considering time and encouraging mindful use. This is something that some of the social media companies have now, where you can like say, give me a notification if I'm using it for more than 30 minutes. And practicing humanity-centered design, which is this new term. So not just thinking about the user or business impact, but maybe how does this impact society, or how will this impact the environment? Social media is just an easy one because I think we're all on it. But when it comes to social media, it seems like from the research that there was a very large impact on teenage girls. So thinking through all of these, and if you've watched, there's a documentary on Netflix about the social media companies, and I'm blanking on the name, but a lot of the tech product managers and designers there say they don't let their kids use social media, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, I know exactly which one, I think.
Yeah, I can't remember it. They do a lot of interviews with, at the time it was Facebook. Anyways, so we've gone through all of these, and now I want to give you some, yeah, do you know it?
I think they said The Social Network, but it's not the movie, it's like the Social Dilemma, I think, right? The Social Dilemma.
That's the one, yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some unsolicited advice, and then we can go to questions. So I wanted to give a little bit of advice that is maybe unconventional on how to succeed. So the first thing that I'm going to tell you is don't worry about conforming to society. So I assume you're here because you're interested in pursuing a career in design. And it's okay if you don't know exactly what you want to do yet. When I was where you are now, I certainly had no idea what I was going to do in the future. But the best way to find your purpose is really to live authentically. So don't go down a path trying to do what your parents want you to do, or what you think might make you a lot of money, or what will be respected. Try things and do what you enjoy. Okay, secondly, create the society you wish to live in. And in order to do this, we need to start with ourselves, because that is really the only thing that we have control over. So be in touch with what you do that gives you positive emotions and really lean into that. You may have several purposes in life. So maybe it is a career in design. However, it could also be being a good friend, being a parent eventually, being a volunteer, being a pet parent, a dog parent, or a cat parent. So your purpose may change over your lifetime, and you may have many purposes. Take the initiative. So this is a huge one, especially coming out of college, especially for me personally, is at some point I realized that you just need to take the initiative yourself. Don't be waiting around for someone to give you permission in your career. You don't need it. If you're waiting for your manager to tell you what to do, or give you more projects to work on, or to give you that promotion, you might be waiting a very long time. So instead, try to take that initiative yourself and be in charge of your own career. And know that whatever you do, you have the power and the responsibility to shape the world. And our growth learning is to give yourself permission to fail. So one of the best ways to grow is to fail and to learn from it. And as we can see in like a lot of growth projects, without the failure, there wouldn't have been that ultimate success. And most people who are really successful have failed so many times. So give yourself permission to fail. I think a lot of times there's a tendency to see failure as a bad thing, when really failure is a necessity. And so be daring, be bold, and give yourself that permission to fail and to learn from it in order to succeed. And the last thing is that sometimes ideal worlds, so if you're looking around today and you see, some war going on, or just things that are not happy with, things that you are not happy with going on in the world, and you think that the world could be a better place, well, sometimes ideal worlds need to be created. And guess what? You, designers, are excellent creators. So I will leave you with that message. Mahalo for having me. It's been a pleasure. I've left a discount code with Leonard, so in case you would like to get any resources or coaching from the craft. And I'm also doing a growth course that will be launching, so if you want to know about that, you can sign up for the craft's newsletter. And other than that, you can find me on LinkedIn if you want to connect.
Well, thank you very much, Sera. Let's give her a hand. That was awesome. Thank you. Do we have any immediate questions in the audience about your future? No, just kidding. But like, if this resonates with anyone, you're definitely at an interesting point where you're kind of starting to think about, where should I go? And Sera's got lots and lots of experience with her agency in that. Yeah, please.
Can she kind of go into more like how she does sustainability and tech? Like
how to fuse sustainability and tech?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Sera. Like how do you do it? How do you fuse sustainability and tech, specifically with conscious design? I guess, right? Like as a new emerging topic here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely emerging. I would say, working in the Bay Area for all of these tech companies, sustainability is not even a consideration, especially because I think people have the tendency to think, oh, well, our product or project is digital, so there's no need to think about sustainability. When in reality, I've started doing a bit of reading about this a while back and just realized something so simple as leaving like 30 browser windows open on your computer is a very bad practice if you're trying to be sustainable. And that's something that I do all the time. So I think it starts by kind of looking at the things that you do that are not sustainable. But when it comes to my own business, what I'm doing is generally I started working with startups very broadly. So I would work with anyone that had a tech startup that was sort of early days, early phases. And so one of the clients I worked for was in like the education space or coaching space. What I'm doing now is I'm actually specifically working with climate tech startups. And it's very interesting for me because I'm an expert in digital design. And sometimes these climate tech solutions are physical as well. So one company that I talked to recently is in California, and they have an AI tractor, but that also means they have a digital interface so that people can understand what's happening with the tractor, what's happening with the crops for the farmers. So there's a bunch of different sort of sectors that you can go into in climate tech and sustainability. And it becomes really interesting, like carbon capture or physics. So lots of opportunities to work with different companies.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. I wonder when we're going to have that. We have this self-driving car at Waterloo, and we do have a lot of Mennonite land around here, so an AI tractor seems like something that we should check with some of our researchers here if anyone's going to try that. Are there any more questions for Sera from the audience? I know there's a bunch of questions online, but now's the time to get all the insight while we have her. I just personally find your background so fascinating. Like you've been to so many different places, and I think partially a digital nomad for some parts of your life. Which is
Yeah,
interesting, but
100%.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any recommendations for students interested in that field that can get into it other than just getting background anyway?
Nice.
Start your portfolio out of something you recommend?
Yeah, do you want me to rephrase that? Did you hear that? No.
And no, sorry, I couldn't hear it.
Okay, so the question is, if you wanted to go into a niche like earth sciences, climate sciences, and you kind of want to make that work with your background in UX, how would you go about finding that niche other than just reading up books and websites and things like that? Like, is there a more strategic way, I guess, to approach this, finding the right niche for you and making yourself stand out so that you get hired or build your own business, right? Like that's your...
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the craft, we actually have a professional product design bootcamp, and one of our students is very interested in climate tech. So what we're doing is getting her portfolio to represent that really. So I always say this, but what you put in your portfolio is what you're going to attract. So if you, for example, have 3 projects for fintech, like banking apps or finance or investing, then that's really what you're going to attract. And the same goes for climate tech projects. So she's already done a climate tech project. We're actively reaching out to a bunch of climate tech companies. There's climate tech job fairs that you can attend. So really a bunch of stuff now. I find climate tech is really growing faster than ever, and there's so many new companies. And you can even reach out directly on LinkedIn and try to get an internship or even just talk to people. So it's good to make connections, make friends, and you never know where that leads you. If they're looking for a designer, then maybe they'll think of you or you can reach out. So being really proactive, I would say, is the solution.
Yeah, and I know that you've heard this from other speakers as well, and this is not really a thing for many students, like LinkedIn is not really visible, but it is actually a really great way, if you have a portfolio or something, to share it with the world and get that visibility for your portfolio. And you might even connect with some more senior designers, which will comment on this and kind of, help you target it a little bit. One of the things that I think in the public discourse we've seen quite a bit is people are aligning their portfolios too much to existing templates. And that's really a problem. Like, you're not going to stand out in the design space if you're just following a very templated portfolio. You really want to bring your unique voice to it and stand out a little bit. So I think Sarah's advice is completely valid there. But yeah,
Yeah.
you had a question?
Because like a lot of like my portfolio is like a lot of different things like videography, the UX, etc. If I'm trying to get like a specific job for like an internship or something, should I change the portfolio to mainly just showcase like the things that I'm doing at that internship?
Yeah. So the next question is, what if you have varied interests, basically? If you're good at videography, you're good at design, you kind of want to highlight
Yeah.
or you're currently highlighting all of those in your portfolio, but your question is, should you just get rid of them, not talk about them at all? Or like, how do you align that strategically so that you get hired for one thing specifically, right? Like, is that a good rephrasing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've made some content on this on LinkedIn actually, because I review a lot of portfolios and resumes myself. And so my recommendation for this is if you have a bunch of things on your portfolio, it's going to look like to the recruiter that you don't know what you're looking for and that you're very junior. And so my advice for this is one option could be to split it out. So if you're applying to video editor jobs and you're also applying to UX designer jobs, let's say, then have two completely separate websites for those so that you don't confuse the recruiter. Another alternative could be if you know you're a bit more interested in product design, that you then have your product design portfolio, but you could have it listed under like hobbies or just some other section that doesn't take away from the section that's on your case studies. So product design teams can actually find it really interesting to know what are your other creative hobbies outside of just work. So that can be a nice touch there, but I would definitely deprioritize it. So visually, you don't want it to compete with the product design portfolio.
Yeah, so finding your emphasis first, I guess, right? And then everything will follow a little bit there.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions in the audience? Otherwise, I'll move on to the online questions. And yeah, feel free to also, as you come up, maybe you'll come up with another question. We'll come back to you. But Victor is asking, how would you tell the difference between a growth designer and UX designer or researcher? What they do in common, or what is very different in their jobs? Can you outline these differences a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, let me go backwards if I can find this. I have a slide that I think covers this quite well. But essentially, growth designers are a lot more metrics focused. They're a lot more focused on measuring the progress quickly. Let me see here. And I think what's important to note is like, just because you're a product designer doesn't mean that you could never become a growth designer. You can definitely transition in and out of teams, right? So initially I was a growth designer for a team in San Francisco. And then when I moved to Amsterdam, I got hired initially to work on a growth project, but very quickly moved into just general product design experiences. So working across the product. But again, where I think the biggest distinction might be where a product designer might work on an entire feature in a product. Or for example, so if we think of Instagram, maybe they're working on just the entire app experience. A growth designer at Instagram might be working on something very specific tied to the North Star. So maybe it's how do we get users to spend more time, which is not a great example, of course, because we don't necessarily want people to spend more time on social media, but they're going to be very focused on that North Star metric and how do we use different levers to help impact that metric. So this is where testing that hypothesis comes in. Product designers don't necessarily test a hypothesis. So I read an example recently with Duolingo where they were noticing that users would not come back into the platform sometimes because learning a language can be a big effort. And so what they did is they have an entire growth team based around notifications. And so they were testing different characters besides Duo, which is the owl, in order to get people back into the app. And they were also testing the copy, so sort of A/B testing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, we'll hear from Victor, but I think that answered it
Yeah.
actually quite well to do that. Okay, he does, no, the next question is from Reza, who's asking, how can designers effectively combine traditional and futuristic design principles in their work? How does Sera do the trade-off between traditional and futuristic design principles?
Yeah, I mean, by futuristic design principles, I'm guessing we mean being humanity-centered. So
I would say so, yeah.
thinking consciously, yeah. I mean, this is something that a lot of designers at tech companies are already actively working on and incorporating into their process. But I would say that that change sort of needs to be actively evangelized by the designer themselves. And so whatever company you go to, you can bring this knowledge with you and bring these skills with you. It's just sort of like how I think just a few years ago, accessibility really took off. Granted, there were also laws that were made where different sites needed to be accessible. They needed to meet certain criteria. At least in the US, there's a law for that. So companies, would start to focus on accessibility, but designers would also be specialized in this area maybe and take their knowledge with them to different companies. So I think it can go both ways really, but the product designer themselves is really responsible for advocating for these things for the user and for the best experience.
Nice. Yeah, I do think that's an interesting way of putting it. Specifically, because we don't really know what traditional and futuristic is. Like, is it humanities focused? But I think Reza likes it. What strategies do you recommend product designers use to protect the user's freedom of thought? I think that is related to this idea of manipulative or deceptive design.
Yeah.
Maybe you can
Yeah,
talk about that a
so
little more.
I think it really goes back to thinking through all of these questions like, why are we doing this? What are we trying to accomplish? How are we going to accomplish that goal? And so if, for example, we go to monetization, which might be an easy area where people try to manipulate, it's what does this user flow look like as they're going through it? And what information are we presenting them with? Are they able to opt out? Are they able to continue on that user flow to their goal with minimal interference? So you're not constantly trying to bombard the user or push them into a certain action. Like this example I gave earlier of the guy who didn't realize that putting in his credit card number for a trial meant that he would be charged. So there was probably some copy missing in that section. And so I think it's really, when it comes to manipulative design, looking at those like nitty-gritty details on every single step of the user flow.
Nice. Okay, I do have more questions, but we have another one here from a student in the class who's asking, hey, I have an off-topic question. I found your background really relatable. Up until 2 years ago, I was pursuing a degree in political science and economics, but I ended up switching to GBDA. While I've started getting comfortable with the new career path and have lots of wacky ideas from my miserable political science days, I don't know if they were miserable, but I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I don't know what I'm doing. Should I expect that feeling to ever just go away as I gain experience, or is it just a normal thing? That's a good question.
Yeah, I think that's a normal thing. I mean, who really knows what they're doing? Nobody knows what they're doing. We're just all doing our best. There's a great quote by Steve Jobs in the Walter Isaacson book that says, so my memory's not so perfect that I'm going to reiterate this line by line, but he says something along the lines of, the sooner you realize that everyone around you, that you're capable of doing the same things as everyone around you, the sooner you're able to really self-actualize. So it's this idea that everything around you is created by man, everything man-made, and any person, it's just that you give yourself the permission, right, to go for it. And so, yeah, I wish I knew that quote a little bit better, but I think at the end of the day, we can all sort of have this feeling like, who knows what you're doing, or what am I actually doing? Especially once you graduate college, then it's like your whole life you've had this map on what to expect and what your journey is going to look like. And once you finish college, like the map is gone and you just have to figure it out. So yeah, I think it's okay. Enjoy the path. There is no right way. It's sort of like my journey, how I came into design, wanting to do design, from such a young age and coming back to it in this really roundabout, circular way. I also studied political science and economics at UC Berkeley because I was told that I couldn't study design by my parents. And so in a roundabout way, I ended up coming back to product design anyways.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, I think that's very soothing to hear, and I think you're right. A lot of us are, just figuring our path out as we're going through it. Another question, bias is often unconscious and difficult to identify. How can product designers avoid bias in their products caused by users or designers? So there can be a user bias or designer bias, of course, when you're designing products.
Yeah, so that's a good question. There are a bunch of principles for bias that you can get familiar with, but essentially it comes with not injecting yourself into the user experience as a designer. And there was a post I made a while back that you are not the user. And this really resonated with a lot of people to the point where one guy actually printed it out and put it on his desk, which I found really funny. But there's such a tendency in startups, especially early stage startups, where the founder doesn't have a design background, where they just think, oh, well, I would do it this way, so we're going to design this, or this is my pain point, so that's what we should solve for. And it's like, no, this is where UX research comes in. So I would say, one of the best and most obvious ways to counteract bias is doing your due diligence with that research process, customer research, and, getting to know really what are the actual problems that people are having straight from their mouth, and then, kind of doing this. I always love doing affinity diagrams. I think that's a great method. You probably learned about it in your UX course. So yeah, just conducting user research, making sure that you're getting enough diversity in your research is a huge one that I don't think is talked about enough. So not just getting users who are, for example, really happy with your product, also getting users who are unhappy or, maybe just satisfied but not super excited about it, getting users who have churned. So did they leave? Why did they leave? And of course, it depends on the goal, like what are you designing for? What is the project? But, baking that into your process can prevent bias.
Nice. I do agree. One last question, and this is more a philosophical one, I think. Shouldn't we have humanity-centered design and human-centered design as one discipline together, I guess? If there are even any differences. I don't know. I think this is just a terminology thing here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think eventually they will be seen as the same thing. It's sort of like now design systems, I think, is sort of seen as an integral part of this UX process or product design process. It's just like, one of the sort of specialties, if you will, underneath product design. And similarly, now we're seeing all these new courses, especially in Europe. I don't see them so much in the US actually, or in North America, on circular design. And so this is also a new type of design that's maybe a little bit less popular for digital designers, but I think we'll start to slowly see all of these things integrate into the product design field. At the same time, I would say don't pay too much attention to definitions. We've also just encountered like industrial designers getting upset at us for using the term product design, or being too tied into definitions. I think at the end of the day, it's just more about kind of practicing these skills.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting takeaway. As much as in the academy we're very much about definitions, I think it does matter how you apply them at the end of the day and how you actually create something based on the knowledge that you have. So I think you're right with that one. Okay, so are there any more questions in the audience? Or is everyone good? Everyone happy with the presentation? Okay. Well, let's give Sera a final thank you from everyone. I thought this was great. Thank you so much, Sera, and thanks everyone online for tuning in. We'll now go into our break.